And would you please say a prayer?
Okay. Well, we take advantage of this opportunity that Gail and I have for our communication, that perhaps the people that view this later will be somehow enlightened, that visionary is a part of their life, and it has something very important to offer all of us in terms of coming together as one being. So perhaps our conversation can serve that purpose in some way.
And so it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me set an intention like that.
Oh, it's a good idea. What could be better? Let's start at the very beginning. Were you born in California? And if so, when?
I was born on January 14th, 1944 in Miami, Florida. It was during World War II. My father's family was in Miami, and my mother's family was in Oregon. They had met at a USO dance in Salem, Oregon, and got married. And my mother was pregnant with me, and my dad was over in Europe. So during the womb, I know my mom was very frightened and very worried about the future and so on. And when I was born, she took me back to her parents in Oregon, and it was 2 years old that when my dad returned from the war and met me, I have a picture. I was wearing a dress. I had long hair down to my shoulders. I had three mothers, a mom, a grandma, and a great-grandma. My dad was horrified, and he took me and my mom back to Florida, and I have only a memory of sharing a tangerine that was growing on a tree on the boundary between where I was living and this other boy's house, and we made bows out of some kind of palm plant or something to make bows. Then my dad went to Kansas to get his master's degree, and I was 6 years old in Kansas, and I had my first garden. I planted a watermelon, and we moved before it got ripe. I remember being very upset about that we had to move, and my watermelon wasn't ripe. We moved to Oregon, where I started first grade and went up through fifth grade in Oregon, Corvallis, Oregon, and then was told we were going to go somewhere very exciting down to San Diego. So we moved down to San Diego, Southern California, 1950. So when I'm hitting graduate school, I was going to college at Pomona College outside of L.A. and graduate school at UCLA. I'm going to graduate school in the mid-'60s. With all that stuff going on, I could remember the Beatles albums coming out. I could remember being chased by the police with Johnson or something there, and that was really something with the revolts and what have you.
That was at UCLA?
Yeah, UCLA, uh-huh. And when I graduated in 1970, I did not want to leave California, but I couldn't get a job there. Reagan was the governor, and all of the positions were closed down. So the only job I had to choose between one at Princeton and one at NYU, and I had already lived 1 year in New York City and didn't want to experience that again. So that's how I got out to the East Coast, which was I found to be a very alien environment for me, very, very different from what I was used to.
But you live on the East Coast now, and a lot of your adult life.
Right. When I was in college, we drove across country 2 summers for jobs. And one summer I drove on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I thought this was where I would really like to live, and I felt really drawn to these mountains and whatnot. And as fate and time would have it, I finally was able to move up here.
Mm. You're a Capricorn. Does that mean anything to you? Do you identify as
Well, it means a lot more than perhaps you want to hear about right now. The very first dream I had, I saw a flying goat. That made the person who owned the goat very special to me. They have a flying goat, and I call the place here Flying Goat Ranch. The astrologies readings on astrology have been important to me from time to time. One of my graduate students did her thesis having 20 astrologers compute this one person's birth data to do a comparison among the 20 of them. I happened to be the person involved. They didn't know that. And one thing that they had the most agreement upon was the person's vocation, a metaphysical teacher author.
Wow.
And the word that was most used by everybody was intense. You got me. And 3 of them had miscalculated the chart. That was one of the things that we learned about checking that kind of thing, because out of 20, 3 had miscalculated, but the other 17 had got it all right. And there was a number of different things there. There's a person that's been writing about astrology from a very different kind of look. It's kind of the approach that I take in terms of cycles. Life has various cycles and so on, not a deterministic kind of an approach or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what has been most useful to me. I have a number of astrology friends who give me readings on my birthday and stuff and see kind of how I'm doing and the various energies and so on. So it's interesting.
I think of it as kind of a map of the karma that we bring in. So it could be very useful.
Yeah, it's like a map of the human experience. Mm-hmm.
Have you taken the Myers-Briggs? You probably have. The Enneagram, do you know those types?
I couldn't tell you about the Enneagram. I've evaluated myself a couple of times long ago, but I couldn't really tell you what kind of a thing, except some kind of, I guess, maybe because I think this way because of my union in terms of balancing oppositions and so on, trying to find a balance between being a caregiver and self-regard and grounded and visionary, different kinds of things. Myers-Briggs and so on, I score, what would you think, an introverted intuition feeling type.
And the last
but
one is...
when you look at the Myers-Briggs, though, too, you can see it's really open to a lot of your values as well, you know, but definitely intuition and sensation has definitely been a dynamic for me. I really like, in terms of all of that, the book Seven Arrows by Hieronymus Storm or something like that, giving a Native American view of the four quarters and how we have to circle around and visit all of them. And I can remember the time I was first exposed to the difference between thinking and feeling. It was kind of like in relationships, you know, and realizing that I'm speaking from a thought point of view, and my girlfriend is speaking from a feeling point of view, and they're very different, incommensurate kind of realities. And that was a really big wake-up thing for me, as much as a psychedelic kind of an experience, you know, to sense that, and then that really had a major impact on me in terms of feelings that I had that were against thoughts that maybe I had, you know, but the feelings can stand on their own.
The fourth category is judging or perceiving, the structured or open options.
So I'm sure I didn't understand what your question was.
The Myers-Briggs, the fourth category is whether you're perceiving or judging. And my guess is that you're perceiving. They like open options rather than structure.
Well, I think that's just a paper and pencil test, and then there's reality and so on. Now, I can be very perceiving in certain areas of life, but talk to my wife, and I'd be very judgmental. So, I think these things vary. And I think with all the stuff going on in the politics, that we've come to realize that, hey, we've taken certain things for granted, but other people see things very differently. And how did I come to hold my point of view, and how is it that I believe in it in the way that I do? And, from mystical literature, every time you're going to introduce a category, the other opposite's also going to be true. So, we get into all of these belief systems and whatnot and that we argue about. It's a whole quagmire of separation and contradiction and what have you. It's so something like Myers-Briggs, and you get on one side of the fence or the other and so on. it has its use, but I'm not going to drive by those labels.
You spent a year at a Jung Institute, and I wondered how that Jungian influence has influenced your thinking.
Well, there's some ironies there. I guess one of the problems of being a visionary is you're ahead of your time, and people don't understand you. I went to the C.G. Jung Sleep and Dream Laboratory in Zurich to serve as a consultant during my sabbatical at Princeton. I was already in really hot water at Princeton because I was introducing prayer into the dreams and trying to get people to have wonderful dreams, not just looking at dreams as like eggs in a chicken factory or something like that and trying to poke at them and see what dreams would pop out, but dreaming intentionally and what have you. And I did an analysis and stuff, and I go to Zurich there, and the guy that wrote the book on what would be my spiritual origin, Asclepios, the guy that healed people in their dreams.
In Greece, ancient Greece.
Right, He was, by the time of Hippocrates, he was already mythical. So this guy had written a book about that, and I was wanting to reintroduce that thing. That's what I got in trouble for at Princeton. And when I got there to his laboratory, what he was doing was a very mechanical approach to research. He'd have people sleep in cold rooms to see if their dreams would show more physical activity as a compensation to wake them up. So he was testing the compensation theory of dreams and using a very mechanical kind of an approach. And I was ashamed for the Jungian world that this was mentality that was thinking up experiments for the C.G. Jung Dream Laboratory. But Princeton would have much preferred that if I had stuck to looking at EEGs and so on, which I had in the lab, but I couldn't deal with all that equipment and putting on electrodes. It's a lot easier to do these days. Gradually over time, I remember when I presented the paper that got me fired from Princeton, when I presented it to my analyst to see whether or not she would say I was being guilty of inflation, of trying to overstep my bounds, I was the human facilitator of people having spiritual dreams. But I certainly didn't put myself as the source of them. I was just a facilitator. I said my goal was to help a person get that frame of mind that the ancient Greek person, what frame of mind would they have been into as they walked in to spend the night in Asclepius' temple? Could we create that frame of mind? And so she read the paper, and she gave me a clean bill of health, but she said one thing, is that I'm ahead of you. I'm not going to be able to find anybody to mentor me. And the people were having dreams that were beyond my ability to really comprehend. My spiritual, people read my past lives, I'm usually goofing off in the temples. I'm not sitting there being reverent. And I haven't really tried to gain any particular skills except getting along better with my wives. And that's hard enough. But, so I felt outclassed by the quote subjects or the clients in their dreams. I hadn't done like that. Now I did later, but I hadn't then. And I remember who's that guy? I'm trying to think of his name that worked with the LSD research.
Oh.
And the mandalas
Leary.
and so on.
Leary.
No, he's dead now. This guy's still going from Czechoslovakia. He'd come up, and he constantly would come and tell me I really should keep that dream stuff going, but I backed out of it because it was threatening in one way. So what kind of a thing was going on here? And then what happened too is other people started dreaming about the people that were having these dreams, and then I moved into a community kind of process, which was much more akin to where I was headed than being a shaman to an individual.
When Princeton didn't retain you, what did they say as the reason?
Well, I've got the letter. First it started out, there was a big. When I got to Princeton, they were famous for their experiments in social psychology and using deception. So psychology was on the road to getting a bad reputation among students and everybody for being tricked in these experiments and what have you. In fact, when I was invited to Princeton, the undergraduate there, their department was very, very low in the esteem of the undergraduates. So they had made a rule that professors could not require students to be in experiments as part of the requirements for being in a course. So I come along, and I'm coming from a very different tradition of trying to present a non-deterministic mechanical view of research, but one of an I-thou relationship between me and the other people. And I'm following this from Martin Buber, and then the first transpersonal psychologist, Sidney Girard, who was down in the University of Florida. And then later, how I got involved with the Cayce folks was I was at the Managers Foundation at a conference. The managers had a Council Grove conference, and I was talking about how I was doing this project, and the man said, well, his grandfather always thought that research should be done in an I-thou way. And I said, who was your grandfather? And he said, Edgar Cayce. And I happened to be talking to the grandson of Edgar Cayce, Charles Thomas Cayce. So I was proposing, and Princeton lets you do whatever you want. So my first course was I was going to propose, what does humanistic psychology really mean? And we're going to take the case of remembering dreams. I said, there's a zillion articles out there where you're poking people to see what kind of dream recall you get. But there's nothing out there that encourages people to learn and develop their memory for dreams so they can have dreams when they want them. So we're going to study that. Am I going to poke people? No, I'm going to invite a group of people, as students, in together. We're going to sit in a circle. We're going to set the intention that we're going to find out what does it take to learn how to remember your dreams. And we'll document this in such a way that we can share our experience with others. And that's the basic scientific method. You experience things, you try things, and you share it with others in a way that they can see if they can try the same kind of stuff. It's not measuring and counting numbers and all that other stuff. That's beside the point. The other is experience and the sharing of experience. And that's a spiritual understanding, perhaps, of science. Well, anyway, so the students flocked to this. You know, I had a waiting list to be in the class. The class was underway when the faculty or the chairman found out that what we were doing and that they were, by force, being in an experiment. Because I said the class is an experiment in how you could do humanistic psychology. So they said, well, you're breaking the rules. Well, I explained it to the students. The students wanted to take it. They didn't care. The rules were meant to protect the students from all of those manipulative psychologists. And here I was opening up the students to something that would explore freely. You know, so the morals were on my side, you know, and the faculty backed down. I mean, what could you do? What could you do, you know? So that was the beginning. So, plus the other thing was, I couldn't believe this. You go in to have the faculty meeting, and this was back, remember, 1970, 71. I don't know what it's like today, but back then, an African-American in a white suit comes in to the faculty meeting with a big cart of booze, and they pour drinks, sit around and have drinks while they have the faculty meeting. Well, I was interviewed for the position. Every professor I went into opened up a drawer and they poured drinks. Little did they know that, you know, I was unconscious. I was an alcoholic. I thought I had found my place. But I couldn't hold my liquor like the rest of them, and I would mouth off in the meetings, and I made a nuisance of myself, for sure. I showed the downside of the free-flowing booze. By the middle of my career, that had all come to an end. That's a whole other story, going to AA and having some other dreams and whatnot. So anyway, when we get I go out to where I'm living now. I didn't know I was going to be living up here, to where the Edgar Cayce has their summer camp, to try my ideas about the Asclepian dream incubation with the kids. Because at that camp, the kids had dreams. They talked about dreams every day. It was already built in. One of the things about the Edgar Cayce community was they had built in an application aspect. They actually recorded dreams and talked about them. They meditated before class, things of that sort. They were putting into practice those things. So it was a perfect situation, you know, and I went through a process and set up this tent, which is a whole other story about doing that. To make it a spiritually vibed kind of a place. And then I told the kids they had to say prayers to see if it would be right for them to sleep in the tent. You couldn't just walk up and say, I want to sleep in your tent, Dr. Reed. I said, well, you've got to be invited to sleep in the tent by a dream, because people back in Asclepius' time just couldn't walk in, you know, and so on. And that was very important. Anyway, and then we ended up with the person would just want to go into all of the details. They can read the articles, it's out there, but they would make a drawing of a wonderful place and a drawing of a spiritual being as if they were involved in an imaginary encounter and a dialogue. And then using Helen Bonny's stuff with the music before they would go to sleep, I would just give them suggestions. They're just going to go away to a wonderful little place, you know, meet somebody wonderful, and something will happen for them that they'll be able to use in their life, and so on. And there were a lot of positive dreams, but then started happening. I think the last thing that happened was I went to see the lady, and she said, I was going to be so scared because I woke up in the middle of the night and the tent had blown away. And I said, oh, Dr. Reed's going to be really mad at me. And the wind was really blowing, and this little old lady, she jumped out of the bushes, and she came over and she grabbed me by the arm and flew me up into the sky. And she showed me all these tablets, and she pointed out, these are all of your lives, and you're right here, right now, and what you're going to do next. And then whoop, I was back down inside, and the tent was back, and I was in my sleeping bag, and I realized, what had I experienced? She had experienced as that guy at Princeton, Julian James, called a bicameral dream. A very special kind of dream like it's in the Bible, where the dream happens right there where you're sleeping. You know, some people call, it wasn't a dream, it was a vision. Meaning a dream, meaning it's not real or something. It happened inside here, where a vision happens out in front of you, and I certainly have had those visions where they do seem like they're happening out in front of you. But anyway, so I had used prayer, and what they say in the thing is that by his use of prayer, he had no interest in being a scientist.
Oh, at Princeton.
So that was to them, and I wasn't even trying to play their game. And it was interesting that the journal took it without a single change.
What journal?
Unheard of. Journal of Humanistic Psychology took the article that I wrote that got me fired. They took it without any changes or what have you. That's how well it was respected what I did. And like I said, my analyst gave her a seal of approval. It's hard to get a seal of approval from a union analyst when you step beyond their little boundaries and stuff. But anyway, I had done that. So I felt very good about it. And, you know, I think, though, the biggest thing you asked, you know, about challenges was my relationship with the people there. One of the professors said, you know, you never would have made tenure. Nobody in my class made tenure, but they wouldn't have cut you off before your 6 years is up had you been more of a team player. You know, you didn't serve on any committees or what have you. We could have put up with a lot had you been willing to be a part of us, but you set yourself apart and so on and so on, so no one had your back when it came to a crunch. And that was a big lesson for me, relationships, you know. And I think that's been one of the hardest things. Being visionary is not too hard if you don't care if other people know or respect it or whatever you're doing, but as getting along with folks and stuff, or having a chip on your shoulder or what have you, those things that get in your way, you know. I've made a lot of those kinds of things.
So you're saying the most difficult things you've experienced are maybe alcoholism and getting along with the establishment?
I think getting along with people, I think, for sure. And really, I'm on my third wife. Hopefully it'll be my last. Getting along. Some say, you know, speaking kindly I'm in my own world. You know, people who, like when living together on campus, they sort of see you walk by kind of absorbed and don't notice us kind of thing. So there's a kindly. People who are my friends say I'm very loyal and generous and kind and attentive to them and so on. I guess it's in the work, would be in the work kind of way. Sometimes too impatient, maybe. I guess there's a certain amount of drudgery involved in any job, and a good team player is willing to do their share. You know, and maybe I was perceived as not wanting to. I know recently with Atlantic University, they're paying a big price for being accredited because they have to answer to outside parties about how they're running their show. We had to introduce grading. We had never had grading before. And that hurt me terribly, having to introduce grading. And turning the whole experience into a commodity that could be measured, and the people could then get loans on credit to pay for the tuition, et cetera, et cetera. And I wasn't willing to do all the stuff you had to do with making it, all the dots, I's dotted, T's crossed, and so on, defining a grade in terms of numbers that added up and all of that stuff. I had to resign, you know, and I hated to be pulling back, but it was just too hard for me to go along with that stuff. Now maybe my dad, he was in education and he was ahead of his time, and he had interpersonal conflicts, and he retired early. So he was in charge though of the pension plan and so on, so he retired okay. So there might have been some kind of a thing of people are not going to accept my thoughts, or I'm going to have to fight with them, or they don't understand. I don't know, but I know that probably I've been more of the difficulty than my ideas, because my ideas aren't particularly new or unusual. I mean, they're out there and so on, but...
How did you get to be Director of Research for the Cayce A.R.E.?
Well, that was the thing I didn't like about being at Princeton. And people always wanted something from you because of the prestige that attached to it, you know. So, and I found that very odd and very weird and not to my liking. It was a much more laid-back environment in L.A. So, like I said, I meeting Charles Thomas. I was doing very innovative research. I mean, nobody was doing research like what I was doing. I mean, we were showing what people were capable of. So he said, well, we've got this membership, you know, and we really espouse dreams. Could you come up with something for them at home to be engaged in research as a personal activity? The idea in the readings was that the Cayce was to inspire the people who were members to be involved in personal research, to try out stuff, not listen and believe in ideas, but to try out things and work with their experiences. So he was very scientific in that sense of being what we would call empirical. Okay, well, how do you get, that is in the 60s, 70s, how do you get a handle on all of that to pass down to the people? What should they do? What would an experiment be? Well, now it's a lot easier to think of that, but in the 60s and 70s, this is the time, you know, where the positive psychology hasn't even really started. Humanistic psychology is just getting underfoot. I was teaching the very first 4 credits humanistic psychology at Princeton in 72. So it was just coming out. So I said, well, what we do probably is we prepare some instructions and have them keep a diary, and because of my class at Princeton, we could measure dream recall. So we had a methodology. One of my students had worked with A.R.E, who did a lot with journaling back then. And so we can use journaling, that's a technique, and have them journal. And so we did this project and showed that, you know, contrary to the assumptions back then, when I was a graduate student, dreams were thought of as a medical sample that you take to the doctor, to have him examine it in private. And here we're talking about people using their dreams for inspiration and for guidance. That's a very different kind of a paradigm, So how could you do that? I mean, the theory was, don't mess with dreams unless you're a professional. You know how that do, be careful. And here we were going to encourage it. Well, Cayce had a principle, and I was just trying to incorporate it, and you start studying indigenous people, and they have this principle which is, don't just sit on your guidance, act on it. If you'll act on your guidance in a manner of testing, you can find out what part of it is right, what part of it is wrong, and then you'll get new guidance. And they even have a word for that. I can't remember the word for that kind of a piecemeal kind of a thing, and that's what he was advocating. So I just created a workbook in which let people come up with something they would like to improve about their life. What little step could they take that step while they would look for dreams that would give them other suggestions, and then it was just based on what we could. I don't remember how we came up with the exercises of how do you make relationships between what you're finding in your dream and what you could be doing with regard to your project. And they had 4 weeks to see if they could make progress. And a lot of them did, and we showed it the first time. Here's evidence people on their own can make progress on an important topic in their life using their dreams without consulting a psychologist. So that was a big deal, and it started all kinds of things. With the Sundance Journals and then the Dream Society and so on, and that's how I was made director of the research.
What I found,
and I was leading a way about doing the research.
What I found from a dream journal is it took months before the symbols would repeat, and I would see the pattern and get what the pattern was.
And so then I started then moving to the dream circle. The whole question of how to interpret dreams fell away because the dream circle, where we get a group of people to try to dream for somebody who was in distress, who had an issue, but you didn't know what their issue was, you get all these people would come together with their dreams. There's no expert in there to interpret those dreams or what the symbols mean and so on. And we work with a totally different way. And that is look for commonalities in the stories, which is a very easy kind of a thing to do. It's right within the human skill, and the commonalities bring out the material that really strikes home for the person that was being dreamed for.
Can you give an example of somebody who had a problem and it was resolved in some way by the group dreaming?
Well, see, that word resolved is a very loose target because often people will come away feeling resolved and they've seen things in a different light. They realize that there was a different way of looking at something. It would be nice if when they go home they could carry through with that. That part of it, how long does that sense of new insights and aha, how impactful is that down the road? That's a study that has not yet been done. So I couldn't tell you. What I do know, though, is you talk to people who will tell you, oh, yeah, I was in one of those circles way back when, and they did such and such, and it made such a difference for me.
Well, can you give us an example of a problem and a pattern in the dreams that address that problem?
Well, I'll tell you a couple. I'll tell you a couple of stories. It's very complex material, and people can get very bored very easily. But I'll tell you a story that gives you some kind of idea. The very first time we did this, okay? The very first time, Bob Vanderkausel and I, we got together and realized this should work. And so we told the kids, we formed two groups. I was in one group, she was in another. All right, in my group, we had, one of the things that came up in all these dreams was water. Somebody walking in, Mom was taking a shower. I woke up in the middle of the night, I was on a boat, the boat was sinking, and I was drowning, and I was feeling water coming into my mouth. Okay, we go around and we couldn't make sense. We've never done this before. You know, years later we have it all down to some, but we had never done this before. And so we're wondering, what does all this water have to do with you? And the girl, she says, well, I don't know if it has anything to do with my question, but I just came out of the hospital because I had a big reaction and so on, some kind of allergy, kind of allergic to something or what. And they had me on medicine, but I was getting paralyzed at night and drowning on my own saliva, and it would be triggered and be awakened. And are you picking up on that? But I don't know what it has to do with the question. My question was, why did my boyfriend and I break up? So then we went around and we started saying, well, let's look at the dreams as what they mean for us ourselves. And so when each of us talked a little bit about what our dreams meant for ourselves, one of the things was coming out was about leaving mother, conflicts with mother, separation from mother, difference of opinion with mother, and so on. In my dream, where I had seen mom in the shower and stay back, coming in kind of the thing. And it turned out that both of them, their mothers, were very much against this getting together. And he was a mother's boy, and his mother talked him out of it, was what we said, and that she should be in therapy, that she actually was freaking out to not be living with her mom, and so on. And she came back the next year. She had gone into therapy with her mom about working all that so that she could go and stand on her own. So you might say it inspired her to go into therapy to work on a problem. The other circle, well, it had black and white everywhere. It was all the dreams, black and white taxis, puzzles, and so on. His question was really funny. Why did my girlfriend break up with me? Same question. Very different dreams. Well, in talking about everything, it turned out that his girlfriend was black. And he had mentioned that. He's a white guy. And this is a long time ago, this is 1974. He couldn't believe that was why she broke up, because he was a white guy. Well, several years later, I'm at the camp, we're setting up the dream circle, I'm telling stories, I tell this story. He raises his hand, Dr. E, that was me, I was in there back then. I went and I talked to her about it, and she admitted she was ashamed to tell me. She was ashamed to tell me, but that was why.
Got it.
That was something. And then I go in, and there was another pair, you want to hear other stories about what they thought was a murder, and prove they didn't solve the crime, but certainly changed the whole picture of it. But I wish, that they've been keeping track of these things. For years, here was the context in which I experienced it, okay? I got an audience, 100, 200 people out in front of me. I'm describing the experiment. I say, who wants to be dreamed for? We've got 200 people. We need about 8 people per circle. All right, we can have 20 people dreamed for. Put your names in a hat. They're putting their names in a hat. We're praying over all of these names. Who could best be served by this bizarre process? We pull out the 20 names. Those people come forward, stand up in front of the crowd. The people look at them, decide quietly who they want to dream for. The 20 people are taken out of the room. The other people come and form the circles, and then the focus people come in and they meet their circles, and they promise to dream for their people. They come back the next morning. I describe a process. There's 20 circles going on. Each of them are doing their own thing. At the end, the 20 people come on stage and stand up and get 1 minute to say, how was it? They're all crying, gushing, all kinds of stuff. I say, will you write me about what happened? Oh yeah, we will. But then nobody does. So I don't have any of those stories, but I've spread things around, It's only because of something my wife came up with that we learned that we can do this by emails. and your people don't have to be at the same place at the same time, that you generate the record automatically by the writing, that maybe we'll be getting some stories. But for years, hundreds and hundreds of stories, you write, please send in your stories. You don't really get much of anything, but you get something spreading, I'm really now feeling more I'm in my Peace Corps volunteer mode, where I'm out there trying to find people who would like to have this experience of giving this circle to other people by sending out the emails and so on, so that more people can experience what it's like to experience this kind of connection with somebody through the dreams, Because they're not just doing it for show or for some trip, because there's a real need there, and the real need, you can see it, brings out an altruistic response on the person. The phrase our hearts went out to says a bundle about what's going on. It says it even in a visionary way, because our hearts don't really go out, yet something happens. There's an energy, there's a connection, and everybody feels that, That's kind of like a communal vision when the reporters all announced, our hearts went out to that gymnast with her broken ankle as she was running to do that jump. We were having a shared visionary experience.
If someone wants to do that, how would they find it online?
I could give it to you verbally, but if they just write me, henry@henryreed.com, I just email them a copy. I couldn't tell you an URL right off where it sits for being downloaded, but they go to the Edgar Cayce Institute for Intuitive Studies, and they'll see a place right for the free book, and they can get it. It's available with the history of it and all the instructions and so on. I'll be finding right now, I've got 2 or 3 volunteers lined up to do dream circles in February, and I'll be announcing what time zones we want to work with and so on, and get volunteers to do it.
Could you say a word about Edgar Cayce's background for people who don't know anything about Edgar Cayce?
Carl Jung, for his doctoral dissertation, which was published around the time that Edgar Cayce started doing his psychic readings. Carl Jung had a relative, a niece, who under hypnosis would start talking about other worlds. And so, and mediumship was starting to come about. And so Carl Jung started studying this, that there's a way for a person under hypnosis to reach out into a broader universal consciousness. He called it the collective unconscious. And he predicted the kinds of things that tend to come out when they do that. They describe other worlds and what have you. And in Europe, there was a lot of what they called medical clairvoyance happening, where a person could be hypnotized, and while they were hypnotized, they could touch somebody who was sick and be able to diagnose the illness. So that was going on, and that somebody was interested, when Edgar Cayce was having trouble with his throat, and hypnosis was popular. He was in Kentucky. They hypnotized Edgar Cayce and gave him some suggestions that he could bring blood to his throat and heal his throat. And so he started doing that. In the course of doing those treatments, he started talking about things, just in the same way that you had noticed that people started doing that. Of course, Cayce and his friends were not aware of this research. One of Cayce's partners, though, was aware of medical clairvoyance, people who, under hypnosis, could diagnose. And so they wanted to see if Cayce could diagnose. And he diagnosed his throat, and then he started diagnosing other people, and he got drugged along by somebody who was interested in the phenomenon, and he was a reluctant participant for a while. Because to him, he was like, I don't know if he was Baptist or whatever, but it seemed to go against his religion, or he was worried it went against his religion. There came some point at which he was getting feedback and he was being helped enough that he decided he would go and do this for people. He certainly wasn't the first. There's a fellow maybe 100 years before him, the seer of Poughkeepsie up in New York. I can't think of his name right off. and he gave readings and described alternative universes and histories and so on. Cayce is perhaps most well known for starting the holistic healthcare movement because he correctly portrayed how emotions and the glandular system work together to regulate the body. And that's proven to be exactly correct, and introduced in holistic medicine, mind and body and so on, and that's where perhaps a lot of the most serious research is concerned. In terms of his spirituality, what he's good for is speaking in the language of the Bible, the universal spirituality that Jung saw happening in the unconscious, that Ken Wilber writes about, or Bindo, that they call the integral philosophy of the idea that it's not the body that evolves over time, it's consciousness that's been evolving over time. And Cayce's readings, like many others, he's not unique in that particular way. What was unique for me was that he had a large body of people out there that wanted to try things. So they became my laboratory, people in their homes trying out things. And thus, that was, for me, it was a research community. Like I said, when I first went to Virginia Beach, my very first time, and I slept there at the ranch of Charles Thomas Cayce, I awoke in the middle of the night with kind of a play on words from their name. We had gathered together, a bunch of us had gathered together for research into enlightenment. This was the name of their place. But we didn't know what to do. We were just bumping around into one another in the dark. And then suddenly we started dancing together in a circle. And in the circle that we were dancing, we each had this round shield that we were showing. It had symbols. And you'd look at a person's symbol somehow, and you would recognize them. And you do this dance, and all of a sudden, this big fountain of sparks shot up and lit up our space. And we knew, this is the way to do the research. This is the research path into enlightenment. And that became kind of like a symbolic, emblematic vision for me about how to approach it. It's possible to actually take an experimental approach to the experience of oneness, that we could actually have this thing that's being written about. And that really energized my research. Like one of the things I would do when we were doing these dream circles for somebody, and using them, they had awakened our ability to heal by their asking for help. Could we enact their dreams and somehow in some kind of a composite and have a use psychodrama to get us together dancing and talking and doing kinds of things spontaneously based on the image in the dream, to have that spark of a moment where all of a sudden we would feel as one, you know? And that was a really exciting kind of thing to do. And so that is how, and one of the things that's come from this is this oneness that we seek is an intuitive kind of an experience. It's not going to be with our senses. And this was a thing that swung the Cayce place over from being kind of, oh, you don't want to be psychic, spiritual is where it was at. And I got caught in the middle of that because they wanted me to create their psychic development program where they had years of bias against psychic development, that wasn't as good as spiritual development. But I said, you can't experience oneness except with the heart. It's an intuitive thing, so that's what we need to be teaching and so on. Now that seems evident, you know, and like why make such a big deal about it, of course. Well, this is like government now. We've got a number of things going where we're trying to have circle experiences for people to experience a kind of oneness through the heart experience or through dancing or the singing. I was influenced a lot by Pierre Vilayat Khan when he taught us Sufi dancing. But I didn't like it because you were speaking a foreign language, you know. One of the things that's hurt my heart the most is us envying the Indians and the Native Americans and other indigenous people, because they're in touch with all this stuff. And we can be in touch with it. We have everything it takes to be in touch with it. But you got to, as they say, look with your heart. It's the imagination. That's that visionary aspect, you know, that you're talking about. That's a visionary for everybody. We long for that.
When you were in the circle dancing and saw the sparks, that wasn't a dream. That was a physical group working together, right?
Yeah, that one we had that moment. Yeah, That was several years ago. I can still see where that happened. We were enacting, in fact, one of the dreams we were enacting was when Charles Thomas Cayce was there in that circle. about a little rubber ducky in the bathtub. And at different points, different people would be a little rubber ducky bouncing around as we were moving in the circle. So I was talking about you were interested in the visionary aspect. Let me tell you a little story about, you go around, you get some chances. I had been invited to the Unity Church in Anchorage to give these experiences. I went there, had really a fantastic time. So they invite me back. So I go back a year later, and I go to the church, and the church is locked up. Nobody's there. When I've flown all the way, from Virginia, they pay for my ticket and everything, and the place is all locked up. So I'm very discouraged. This has been very, very, very hard, not an easy road to hoe. And I go out to a park on the glaciers, and I'm walking around feeling sorry for myself. There I've been stood up. It's so hard. Why couldn't it be easier? Look at some people, names that you've heard of, they must have it easy and all that. Feeling sorry for myself. And all of a sudden, right in front of me is Rolling Thunder. If you've heard of Rolling Thunder, one of the first Native Americans to speak publicly to white folks about spiritual things. We met him first at the Council Growth Congress and at the Manager Foundation in the 70s. And they've written a book about him. And he really hit it off with Charles Thomas Cayce and when they'd come to the camp a couple of times. I had him in dreams a couple of times. But this time, here he was in Eskimo garb out there on the glacier, and he runs into me and says, "Henry, you quit baking," and he punches me in the chest. And he says, "You ought to feel grateful that you have the opportunity to talk to people about stuff like this." And then he disappears. And I realized I had a vision. And it still hurt really much in the chest. I went to where I was staying, and I drew a picture of what I was feeling in my heart. The thing, since then I had to sell it. And then I went for my walk, it was whispering in my ear, the intuitive heart, the intuitive heart. That would be the phrase I would use to encapsulate all of the research and the orientation I was going to take about these different kinds of experiences that people could relate to that. Now, of course, it's very common to hear about heart and what have you. But I found it's one place where the average person can relate to the whole idea of intuitive communication. When we talked about our hearts went out to. So.
Before we leave, Cayce, if there was one book that a beginner would start with to learn about Cayce, what book would you suggest?
I would suggest the book that I co-wrote with Kevin Todeschi called Contemporary Cayce, where we go through for every topic in the Cayce readings, we discuss it from the point of view of contemporary science and philosophy. That you'll find that most everything that Cayce talks about, there's some special interest group, organization, what have you, that deals with that kind of a thing. It's, you wouldn't say mainstream exactly, but there's a lot of literature and what have you, and different ways of thinking about things and so on.
What do you think? What do you think that Cayce was tapping into? The Hindus call it the Akashic records. Jung calls it the collective unconscious. What do you think he was accessing when he channeled?
I think he was finding a way of serving people.
But where did he get the information?
Well, I could just give you words. What difference does it make? Those are just labels. What we've learned is how to access that source of inspiration and help. And people accessing it maybe in different ways have different terms for it. That wouldn't matter so much as their intent and what they did with the access.
But what do you think that source is?
The great mystery. How about that?
What about the quantum information field?
What does that give you? What do you gain by calling it that? Each of those gives you a little bit of something to look at. It has that aspect. It has that aspect of you can feel close to somebody far away. There's entanglement, right? All right, that's quantum stuff. Oh, it sort of explains that. But how do you explain, they talk about vibrations. I take exception to it all. I take exception to it all because you're missing out on the human beingness. How do you talk to a vibration? I don't like this person's vibes. This person has better vibes. Well, it's all dehumanizing physicality and so on. In vibration, it means going back and forth, back and forth between two opposite poles. And the one vibration that I found is real for people is the love vibration. Because you can say, and what is it? It's the feeling of I am you, I am not you. I say the love vibration is going back and forth between the two complementary, polar opposite experiences, I am you, I am not you. And one of the dances that I developed based on the Sufi method goes something like, I know that you know that I love you. What you know is that I know you love me too. I know that you know that I am you. What you know is that I know that you're me too. Now we're dancing in a circle, taking hands, looking at one another, singing that, feeling the heart. We've had practice in using and trusting our imagination. When you go out and you see a flower smiling, the sense of smiling is your visionary imagination. And that connects you, though, with the living beingness of the flowers.
You help people develop their intuition, their psychic abilities. You've worked with over 5,000 people in your workshops, and you approach it through the imagination and the heart, would you say?
Primarily, my purpose is that it seems like when we look at each other with the senses, we're separate and different. And when we talk with our words, and you are all these categories, in the silence, as people in the silence and join with the heart, they can feel great empathy for one another. We're in a time where we have people with very, very different lifestyles, but they all love their kids. That's an example that's often given. So when they connect on love for their kids, they all feel a unification. But when they connect on should we be closing the borders, then there's big fights. Okay, so we've got to find a way to really connect where it matters, where we can work together. And what we find in this intuitive communication, it's more the human contact and so on, where the words divide, where spirit unites. And that sort of really is my purpose. Well, you see, here's the thing that's happening. What's going on is that we're losing boundaries. Talk about the changes. The one that I've been focused on is, it started with the question, why is psychic ability scary? Why do people say, it was spooky? I was thinking about this person, then they just phoned up, and that was spooky. What's spooky about it? So I spent a long time looking at that question. Because what's happening, we're losing a lot of boundaries. It began first with pollution, and Rachel Carson, the Silent Spring. What did she say? Pollution does not respect political boundaries. And that made a really difficult time for the two countries. Your smoke is coming over into our country. Stop your smoking. And you say, but we're a sovereign nation. We can do as we damn well please. Yeah, but your smoke is coming over into our stuff. So all of a sudden, because pollution wouldn't respect political boundaries, we have to learn how to work with this sovereignty maybe a little bit differently, And then you look over the course of the years what other boundaries are broken up. Biological boundaries with AIDS, the digitization, the information boundaries, gender boundaries now. We have fluid gender boundaries. Very disruptive for a lot of people. And so on. Now, what now going on in all that context, what's driving that? Globalization is some of what's driving it. Electronic is driving some of it. But what happens when people are codependent with one another, like we're getting all around the planet, how people in Japan spend their money is going to affect my price of tea. So we're codependent with each other. That we know from experiments, we've become more telepathically sensitive for one another. So the people on the planet are becoming more telepathically sensitive for one another. What have we been learning from the dream circles? It takes one to know one. What are you going to pick up about other people when you're trying to help them? Stuff that relates to you. Somebody else is going to pick up something different, stuff that relates to them. Okay, so now you see this world out there, and everybody's telepathically picking up on everybody else, and things are squishing down, what starts happening is you're going to get people who focus on the love vibration and they're feeling something really good is growing. Other people focusing in a different way and they're getting really scared. And then the confirmation of that came up on Facebook, where it showed how, because the way Facebook works, people get into their own echo chambers and are only getting information that matches their own. So all of a sudden you have the world consciously coming to this big divide where some people are being enraptured by this feeling of love and other people are being scared to death physically by the feelings of fear. And this is just building and building and building.
So what's the solution?
I've been trying to create an arc to be able to ride that, where you can take the experiences and be able to, that's where mindfulness meditation is becoming so important these days. It becomes kind of like an arc to ride the waves of feelings as you begin to find and face your own place in this. And it's very difficult. As much as I would like to say, I would stand for all these liberal things and Medicare for all and blah, 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 I have to take some responsibility for that there are folks voting for Trump that feel that I'm looking down my nose at them. And I have been judgmental, and I have to look at that. And that makes it hard. That's not going to be easy. But we find in these circles that we come out and we're all facing having to look at that, and we find that we have these things in common. And speaking from the imagination, from our dreams, from the soul, we find we have these things in common that are more important to us than these things where we're different. So maybe a way to talk that through.
If you're
that's what's driving me.
If you're in a workshop, how do you help people get in touch with their imagination and their heart and get out of their brain?
Very simply, I want to do this in a way that would cause no divisiveness. So here I am, 200 people I've never met before, and I say, who among you had the experience of regret over not following a hunch? And everybody raises their hand. And say, look, we all have that in common. We've all experienced regret over not following a hunch. Why didn't we follow that hunch? Let's think about that for a little bit. And from there we go into a discussion and an exploration about how our hunches and our intuition is invisible out there. That we don't have a way of sharing it. No one ever said, don't pay attention to what I say, it's what you think that counts. You're supposed to learn how to form the letters correctly. We've never had an opportunity where people get together and say, well, what's it like for you? How are you experiencing it? And so on. Let's discuss how intuitions are experienced. So we start, I say, here's something we all have in common. I want you to very gently start being aware of your breathing. Just be aware of your breathing. Notice that it has two parts, an outgoing and an incoming. Notice that the outgoing is relaxing, and the incoming, how is the breathing happening? I said, when I asked you to pay attention to your breathing, were you breathing before that? Yeah, you were, right. But when I asked you to pay attention, did you grab onto it? You did, you're right. Are you doing better job than God on your breathing? What is it about it, To be able to let it come to you. You really believe intuitions have to just come to you? You say, this is the age where we can worship intuition, but this is the age where we're going to learn to be intuitive ourselves. But the trouble is people say, when I try to be intuitive, it happens spontaneously, but when I try to be intuitive, I get in my own way. I say, well, watch right now. Be aware of your breathing, but let it be. There's the challenge right there. Look, so here's what we'll do. We'll just start relaxing. Let's see if we can relax to the point where we can allow the breath to come to us. I'm letting go and letting the life breathe me. It's happening all day, all night. Just watch it. This is very natural. It's safe. So we introduce people to the experience of being mindful of the breath, but they are experiencing it as a willing and voluntary activity. In the same way that intuitions come in that same way. Then the next thing is I ask them to become a visionary. I ask them, while you're experiencing your breath, what does it remind you of? What is it like? One person says, it's kind of like the waves coming in and out of the ocean. Exactly. Exactly, it is like that. How many of you can relate to what that person said? How many of you can relate to, it's kind of like the waves coming in and out? Yeah, okay, somebody else. Somebody else. Oh, to me it's kind of like a balloon that fills up and then empties. Yeah. How many of you can relate to that? Yeah. Okay, now notice what you've done. You've been a visionary. You've taken a physical sensation and you've created a story from your imagination. You've a story about waves, a story about balloons, images. But notice, we could all relate to that. And we could see it too. It made sense to us. So your private intuition, your private little vision is not so weird. We can relate to it. Let's start there. We've got something together there. We can build on that. And we go a little farther and experience gratitude. And what's that feel like in the chest? What images come to you? Share that with another person. Yeah, they have something similar and so on. And you start building confidence that the imagery that comes to them spontaneously to describe something that they're experiencing makes sense. And it makes sense to another person. That's really important. That's one of the things that you see, one of the things that come from this mind work that's so important is the Native Americans, when they say, my relations, that's it. The coming feminine, that doesn't have the I, has a separate I from the rest of the world. The feminine I is more, are my relations. And you start realizing when you get into this intuitive thing, because the information does come to us in your own personal language, which has been built up on experiences with other people and relations with different things, that we really are built of our relations. And so one of the big surprises for me, one of the great things that came from this, was teaching people what seems like this are going to be a skill set of intuition, becomes more almost like a lifestyle and a consciousness style that's bringing in the conscious feminine, the divine feminine, which of course is consistent with what's happening. It's consistent with the evolutionary trends that are underway, the return of the goddess. It's certainly an example.
So then the people take 3 minutes to just close their eyes and tune into the other person and then share what they experienced?
Yeah, that's our starter. What we do is, in that particular case, and this, by the way, maybe you got a chance to read it, was a very successful article I wrote up in the Jungian Journal. They sit there, and I have them first, they mirror each other. So they're making waves or faces, and they do it back and forth to get into harmony. Then they put their hands down, they close their eyes, and then they make that feel a heart connection, and then turn it loose. We distinguish between visualization and the imagination. So you visualize something that you're specifically intending, the heart coming together, and then turn loose your imagination to do whatever spontaneously happens. Then at the end of 3 minutes, they come out and they share with each other what happened, and then we discuss what they learned by sharing. And so they start becoming trained in what to look for. Like, for example, sometimes they had similar things that they saw. They both saw life. Sometimes one would see something about the other person's life. Other times it would seem like they were there together, like it seemed like there was some energy between us going on. Other times a person would say, I was forgetting where I was, and I was thinking I was shopping somewhere. But that fantasy would maybe relate to what the other person was doing. But then we get them to a different person, and then a different person, and they start seeing that different people feel different. They don't feel the same. And one of the experiments, after meeting some people, I had them blindfolded and put to see if they could get back with the person they were first with, based just on the feeling. And we had some success with that. And then also used astrology one time, where the people who had the most planets in common in the signs, we both had 3 comets in the same sign, that when we got together, we had a lot of stuff happening in our silence, where 2 people who had nothing in common in their signs, they didn't have that much going on in the silence. These were all just, introductory kinds of forays into seeing what you might explore.
And meditation helps you with your intuitive abilities. You mentioned mindfulness meditation.
Well, you have to make some big distinctions. My students taught me this. They were a lot versed in Cayce's form of meditation, which is more contemplative meditation, where you're focusing your mind on something with a goal of changing the quality of your consciousness, like focus on love. And the intuitive part, we focus on gratitude to actually change your state of consciousness. In mindfulness meditation, there is no goal as to some state of consciousness, but rather you be aware of the flow of consciousness. And I remember my students, when I was introducing them to mindfulness meditation, they said they missed the good feelings of their original meditation, where they would specifically go in to get into a good space.
Yeah.
In mindfulness meditation, you're not interested in. I find both of those goals are necessary. What I teach is, first is the mindfulness meditation, but I teach it very differently, because people come at it from a masculine point of view. They say the purpose of the meditation is to keep your mind focused on a focus, like your breath, and that kind of thing. So that's impossible to do. That's toxic masculinity. I say you're doing mindfulness meditation by setting the intention that your mind will rest on the focus. That's just setting your intention and your willingness, but that you will find your mind wandering. When you find your mind wandering and you bring it back to your focus, you are doing mindfulness meditation. So, if you go all hour, it takes you an hour, and you were wandering the whole time, but there at the end you realized it and you brought it back. Great! You did mindfulness meditation. That's great. Build on that. Because most people who tell me they can't meditate, they tell me they can't keep their mind on focused, which is impossible. Anyway. And it's a false thing, you know. It's a sign of the toxic masculinity in our culture that it gets brought down that way, because it's really asking for mindfulness. Be aware. Be aware. So you have to learn that. The other is the being able to go into the self-hypnotic state, the pre-conscious mind, which means that your relaxed imagery is flowing freely. Then another quality is what they call raising your consciousness, which usually has to do with your being involved with some value of yours. We use love, to get into a place. I use an argument, and I have in a slideshow, that there are some things that you can do with remote viewing, say just by relaxing, and you could describe what is going on in a different scene. But relaxing would not be good enough to prepare you to answer the question, what could improve things going on at that scene? That's a different ability. And relaxing is not enough. You need to refine your consciousness in some way. I would say make it harmonious with everything. And gratitude is a good start, because you lose all your agendas in gratitude. You think everything is totally fine, and maybe then align yourself with what is, because you want to bring forth guidance based on what is, not what you wish was there. So that's and people who review that say, yeah, I have a coherent approach to initiating, intuitive guidance. The other skill I think people need, I've never seen anybody teach it, but I have it on my videos at YouTube, is they need to learn how to do reflective listening with themselves. You're taught often how to do reflective listening, where you repeat back what the other person has said in your own words, and then maybe add what they seem to be feeling about that. But that is very, very powerful. I demonstrate that on TV. Really, if you could just do that with yourself, to be able to trace back your feelings, that a lot of your spontaneous stuff is prompted by intuitive things, but when it gets out to the surface area, it's categorized in such a way that you argue and things with it, but doing reflective listening with yourself, you can bring it back down to the source. And I demonstrate doing that. And the other skill is what I would say is memory, being able to allow memories to come to you. And you don't have to worry about visualization, because we've shown that people visualize whether they see it, what they're doing, or not. People visualize whether they see what they're doing or not. You get what I mean? Visualize, that is, they work with plans diagrams, schemas, and so on in the mental. They may not see them, but they think them. So I get away. I do not like to deal with a person. What if I can't visualize? So you'll do okay, fine. Just pretend that you are. It just takes them into a dead end.
In this book, what I'm saying is that people like you are creating a new paradigm in science that says consciousness comes before material, whereas the old scientific paradigm said materialism creates consciousness. So could you say a word about consciousness?
No, I don't know that I could. I wouldn't even know how to describe it, except the fact of somehow being aware. Spending a lot of time, one of the things that's happening, I see a lot of it on YouTube, is the intelligence of animals. And we used to really minimize what animal consciousness was. But now we're saying animals seem to have almost as much going on in consciousness as we do. And so I think that, is certainly affecting our notion of consciousness. I read accounts of people trying to define it and so on and whatnot. And I don't waste much time thinking about it.
But do you think we're creating a new paradigm of science?
Yes and no. The old paradigm, that is, we operate by experience, not just by belief. But now we're also accepting experience, not just with the senses. If there's a new paradigm, it's expanding the old paradigm to allow information other than what comes from the senses. The emphasis on communication or corroboration is important. However, you notice in the dream circle, we get corroboration, but we don't get sameness. This is a really good example. I just give you two sample dreams very quickly. In one dream, I'm watching television and a commercial comes on, so I get up to get myself some coffee. I go pour myself a cup of coffee. I go in the refrigerator to get some cream. I start to pour the cream in the coffee. I see that the cream is sour. Oops, good thing I didn't pour it in there. I go back to the fridge, get a fresh creamer, pour that into the coffee, come back, the TV show is resumed, and I watch TV. Second dream, I'm driving to work. I come to a traffic light, it turns red, I gotta stop. I'm sitting there waiting for the traffic light to change. Pretty soon the traffic light changed to green, I start to go. I see out of the corner of my eye this car coming, braking through the red light. I stop to put on the brakes to avoid a crash. The car runs through the intersection, then I hit on the accelerator and resume my trip. Those two dreams are very different. There's not anything that they have in common by way of words, symbols, actions, or whatever. They do not seem to agree. Yet the drama in each of them, somebody is involved in a habitual action when something out of the ordinary occurs, which they notice in time to avoid a problem. Now, what we find is the dreams talk at that second level. The first level is very different. People have very, very different experiences, but the laws of life are the same. And that being expressed in the themes, you see. So when we talk about science and corroboration and what have you, how do you corroborate subjectivity? You see, and you do it, and the approach here is it's an emphasis on using a group approach. What we do is looking for the common denominator. Recognizing that you will get the variation, and each variation has its importance, but it's the common denominator that then tells you at another level what it is that you're looking for. But not a new paradigm in the sense that we're going to get rid of testing, but a new paradigm certainly in what things that are being allowed. I have a friend that was a mathematician professor up here in Virginia, and he wrote a book called Reason and Wonder. He got into teaching a class on consciousness. And he was writing about all the originators of science back at the time of the Enlightenment and so on, and how they were all very religious people. And they were practicing science for the sake of God, not to how would you call it, replace them. So, anyway. But definitely, the new paradigm, and also you see that the new paradigm is not distinct from the new consciousness that's coming in, too, because it takes the people to create the science, and it's us people. And I think, I think the becoming feminine is probably a more succinct vision of the changes that are happening than a change in the science paradigm. There's a whole value system, and think about the minorities or what have you, the forgotten, the major part of the Christian story, the major aspect.
How would you define the feminine? What are its characteristics of the great mothers, Erich Neumann, Dick Talder?
Well, when I talked about the feminine, I wasn't referring to people in skirts, but the aspect of creation that hasn't split into two yet. The aspect of creation that operates from oneness. And the separation was very scary, and to continue it, I mean, why do they have to initiate men? Because they really don't want to leave Mama. And so that says something about the you see, in the new philosophy, this, what do we call it, the integral philosophy, and not just one person, lots of folks. I'd like to see some criticisms of it. I haven't run across any. I'm sure they must exist. But one of the ideas in it was expressed by a lady, Alice Miller, who was a female psychoanalyst, and she's not. I don't know if she might have been dead. Who knows? But anyway, here's the story she tells. We were born into this world as wild person geniuses, only to discover that the world doesn't want wild person geniuses. They want well-behaved citizens that form their letters correctly and drive on the right-hand side of the road. So we come into this world waving both arms and legs, and then soon we start putting our left hand and our left leg behind us and get by limping along on our right leg and our right hand and like everybody else. Until the day comes, because God did not intend us to go through life limp. So God puts in our path an adversity that you can't solve with your right hand and your right leg, and after a while, God darn it, you bring out that left leg and get it working again. And the adversity that you forces you to bring out something that's been put in the manger and bring out, and now look at it in a different way and incorporate it, and you grow. And that's basically the story of the evolution of consciousness. It goes and it creates all kinds of wonderful things, and then it confronts something it can't deal with. And so sensory consciousness, which is done great for science and health if we spend the money, etc., has but run into some of the downside of the sense of separation. And we're living with that. And one of them, what's been prophesied, is that we eat up the planet. And that's what the indigenous people were warning about. You're not separate from the planet. Maybe you got to use your eyeballs really good, but you stop seeing with your heart, doggone it. So now you're seeing something I never really bothered to look at, and yeah, that makes a lot of difference in that, but you're missing this. So then the evolution of consciousness is we've got to go do something because we're going to croak if we don't be able to be aware and respond to this, and then so it evolves so that somehow we can see the imaginal and the sensory and integrate it at the same time or something. Who knows what's coming? But I haven't found a better succinct metaphor for it than the return of the goddess.
And are you hopeful?
What am I hopeful? You mean for the universe? Yeah, I'm sure the universe has been around. It'll keep going fine.
What about planet Earth?
I think that there's good enough things that it will happen, be reinvented or what have you. I don't see. I'm not. I have a lot of retrograde planets. I have fallen apart many times in my life and hit bottom or below and come up again. Okay? So I don't like it, but I know that there's always a tomorrow.
Do you have children?
Unless they were keeping things from me, no. But I have, in some ways or other, adopted a bunch.
And do you find that the young ones are more caring and more in touch with their intuition?
It depends on whether or not they're around grown-ups. But I don't really have all that much contact with kids. I've wanted to try. One of my hopes was that I would find somebody that would put this dream circle, would watch it with teenagers, because teenagers need to be making decisions based on what they're going to have to live with, and their instincts. They should be taught to trust their instincts. And I think in these circles, you could just have a grown-up monitoring what have you. They'd be very impressed. You know, see, in the Cayce community, those grown-ups value dreams, so they teach their kids about dreams. But out there, go to the schools, you know, you don't get that necessarily that kind of an acceptance. It exists here and there. I haven't really made the connection yet to see what it would be like, except at the camp. You know, that's a standard thing they do at the camp with the dream circle. Because I think it'd be a wonderful thing for the kids.
Could you say a word about your mandalas and your art, how you access that creativity?
There's a lot that could be said. The thing that I've been trying to teach lately, because they've invited me to teach at the art school, I don't consider myself an artist except spiritually, not out to make money. The joy of making art. And what I found when I was a youngster, I really enjoyed making art as gifts for people, and when you gave your art as a gift to people, they always liked it. Whereas if you made it stuck on a wall and said, you think I could sell it, you get all kinds of comments. So I started out making art to give to others, and then a girlfriend gave me a watercolor set. I had never used them except in the grade school, and I was homeless at the time, and I didn't have much space to work in. It was a little tiny set, and I was very intrigued by it. And so I didn't know how to work with it. Watercolors were threatening to me. So I had a dream where I was going into a theater, and on the screen, I saw this picture. And then my dad's voice was in my head saying, Henry, you could paint like this. And what the picture was of a scene, I could recognize it out on the interstate, where the lines had been drawn, and then in each little space, color had been added, like paint by color or something like that. And I realized I could start like that. And so I started painting where I would do the drawing and then just fill in with the color. And I really enjoyed doing that. And pretty soon I stopped doing the drawing with the lines and whatnot. Okay. Then there's a time with the internet and so on, and good business practice, stay in contact with your customers. Well, I don't like to be having to be selling stuff or whatever kind of content, but it was a time of digital art, and I could make mandalas, which my mom said I'd been making since I was a kid, with blocks or whatever, that I could on the computer create a mandala in a minute. and then I could mail it off. And so all of a sudden, I said, what I'll do is instead of saying words to my people, I'll make them a mandala. So every day I made a mandala and emailed it out to my list and put it on Blogger so anybody could find it. We went that way for 7 years, and over the course of time, with the dream that I had, I worked out a way of painting mandalas that was a way of learning how to work with watercolors. And the underlying spirituality of it, this is really on the feminine. So you get people in the Army and everybody wears a uniform. However, with women, if everybody came up with the same dress, it would be horrible. Everybody has a different dress. And so everybody, a mandala, no two are alike, and yet each one is saying exactly the same thing. God's flower, God's flower, God's flower, God's flower, God's flower, the oneness of all creation. You are God, it's all one, all one, all one. And yet there's a zillion ways of saying it. So it's kind of like sending a blessing. And then one person, how do you have time to look at it? Again, male consciousness. How do you have time to do one every day? I don't. I make that out when I'm in the mood. When I'm not in the mood, I don't. But I make sure I make enough to be able to send you one every day. So I was being gentle with myself. I wasn't strict. Again, that male consciousness comes in all the time.
Jung says that mandalas are to integrate opposites, unify opposites.
Well, I like that idea because that's true in my life. I feel that. Feel the energy, the opposite vibration, I am you, I am not you, creates love. The opposites for me, he is pointing out the circle and the square. And the idea is the circle is everything, its life is as it is, and the square is our trying to understand it, the four corners of the earth. And what they show is that you cannot create a circle, you cannot create a square that has exactly the same area as a circle. That's these geometry type people, which is to say there's no way that you can manifest in life that will express everything about the Creator. There's always more. You can't get it all in. You can have it all fit as a whole, but there's always going to be other different kind of things.
You talk about God. How do you think of God?
That life is intelligent, and how did I ever get the sense that there's beingness here? That must be God. I don't have else to explain it. And it's pretty darn effective, it makes a big difference.
Let's just briefly go over your books. In Channeling Your Higher Self, the subtitle, Edgar Cayce's concept of the superconscious mind and how it can transform your life. Say a word about channeling.
Well, I'm going to show you my edition of the book rather than what's on Amazon. I laid out the book. Then they discontinued it, but I thought it was too important a book to be out of print, so I put it out, but I created a new cover, and I corrected one error that's in the book. And if they go on Amazon, there's a lot of people, you won't see this cover, but you'll see one place that says, as the author, if you buy the book from me, I'll give you a special cover and I'll sign it. And in this book, this is the script for how a group can self-conduct their own intuitive heart experience, starting with the meditation that we talked about, drew the dream circle together, and so on. I'm trying to deprofessionalize this whole process. That makes it harder for me because most of this stuff is driven by people who are making money and have a financial incentive to get people together. I'm trying, as a Peace Corps volunteer, to get people to go and run a circle, trying to make it more just common, people might come over and share cookies, kind of thing. But what were you asking me?
Well,
channeling, I define channeling. In here, I give an example. If your kids were to watch a football game and to say, Mom, what sports is it where you fight over a ball? You'd be really upset. because you knew sports is like collaborative physical activity where it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Now, that's a very spiritual concept. You know, and why some cultures have used sports as a way of making spiritual decisions, whether we turn it into a materialistic enterprise to make money. Okay. So, channeling, if you look at it as letting some spirit talk through you, it's the same way as saying sport is like fighting over a ball. It is just one extreme example of the huge phenomena by which the invisible factors in life affect the coming together into physicality. Now, when it has to do with humans, it has to do with their mind and what they can produce with their body, which means their voice talking in their hands. And a little sum with the experience in their brain, because you can do channeling and have it all like music you hear, but then you're putting it out there. So all these things are breakthroughs of our assumed boundaries between what's possible and what's not possible, what's real and what's whatever. It's a breakthrough because the person's consciousness has changed in such a way that it's now possible to experience different modalities that weren't possible and perhaps to express them.
So when someone's channeling, like Cayce, what are they channeling? Entities that like used to have bodies and are on the other side?
That's the common perception, which is sad, but it's understandable because they're operating still from the boundaries they want to hold on to. I define channeling as idealistically prepared improvisation, so that you allow Source, the unconscious, all the great unknown, to express itself through your chosen modality. So I ask kids, you're going to come out in front of the grown-ups and you're going to do a dance and you're going to show the grown-ups how the raindrops feel when they evaporate into clouds. Help the grown-ups feel how a raindrop feels when it evaporates into a cloud. And the way you're going to do that is by your dancing. I don't say anything more than that. And the kids go out there and channel a performance. Now, what about that as channeling from a Cayce perspective? Well, there was a service orientation. I think of it as like Benjamin Franklin discovering electricity. He grounded his activity and the electricity could come down. Channeling just to hear yourself speak, just to see if you can do it. That's one thing. I say it's like a trick. But in this case, the kids weren't doing a trick. They were going to try to help the poor grown-ups who never thought about how a raindrop felt. Let's go help out the poor grown-ups. So they were helping out the grown-ups. And that was their purpose. When I was making art, I wasn't thinking of it as channeling. I was just making a gift. I knew, though, that the motivation to make a gift inspired my creativity. I was using that. And the best channelers are serving. Now, in my book on channeling, I have two stories. The first and then the rest of the story. The big story is when Edgar Cayce sought a psychic reading from Eileen Garrett. Eileen Garrett was a big famous medium psychic who started the Parapsychology Foundation, who made a lot of money, very wealthy, and put a lot of money into parapsychology. So she went, and I described this in my book. She went to Edgar Cayce to get a reading, and they gave readings for each other. And she gave a reading for him that described what he did, pretty much the way he described it, but also suggested that there was an easier way he could let some spirits provide the information. He tried that a couple of times, an angel or something, and he said he just didn't want, he didn't want to wear a prophylactic when he talked to God, kind of a deal. So, that's my words. When Eileen Garrett asked Cayce, how did Eileen do what she did, he said, it is not for me to say. It is in your experience to know. So Eileen Garrett, what Eileen Garrett did was she hired Ira Progoff, who ended up writing a book about what I'm going to tell you. This first part is in the Cayce story and so on. And Ira Progoff, he was a Jungian-type analyst, and she hired him to psychoanalyze her spirit guide. She typically would come in and sit, and she'd go unconscious, and then Ubani would come out and do the reading for the client. Okay? But now the client is Ira Progoff, who's here to psychoanalyze the spirit guides. So Ubani would come, and he wrote a book about this. And Ubani would come out and talk and so on, and pretty soon the things that Ubani would tell Ira would write. That it was uncanny, because read my unconscious knew about me and so on. But he's still trying to figure out, what is this, where is this coming about? So one day he gets this inspiration, and he asks Ubani, Ubani, it's been 3 weeks since our last session. What have you been doing during that time? And silence. And then pretty soon there's a shake-up, and Eileen shakes up, and now she takes on this different countenance. And this guy says, I am Adam of all, and so on. Ubani is not qualified to answer that question. You have drawn upon me, and I must straighten you out. If you continue to ask, where does this information come from? Is it from a sub-personality of Eileen, or is it a real spirit out there? If you continue to search within with such a dualistic framework, you will never come to understand the meaning of transpersonal. For we are all one. But having to do with motivation, experience, and so on. And Eileen is such a person who over many lifetimes has studied philosophy, tried to develop herself, tried to help other people. And so she has really become what you might say a really well-developed channel and could reach into higher and higher aspects of the mind, the same mind that you have that you're not functioning with. And it's not about making it up in sub-personalities or external things. It's all one. One of these days you'll be able to understand this, but you'll probably have to be in another state to do it. State of mind. Because in our conscious state, it's so hard to get out of the dualistic. So then, I think of his name. Oh gosh. Another person, you might have heard, he's written a lot about prayer and meditation and so on. He wrote an article called, When is Ubani? When does Ubani appear? And he was familiar with the book and all of that. And his example was this. He said, why is it that, what happens when people ask, well, what would Jesus do? They imaginatively put themselves into that mentality, and then in that mentality, different kinds of ideas come to them. Look at the number, and it says, excuse me for speaking about mathematics a little bit. But what is the imaginary number I? It's the square root of -1. Why do we call it imaginary? Because you can't multiply something by itself and get a negative number. If you have a negative number and you multiply it by itself, it's a positive number. Excuse this mathematics. But they found that the square root of -1, called I, because it's imaginary and couldn't possibly exist, is vitally important to electronics because it allows a certain mathematics to exist that you can calculate circuits. So without the use of the imaginary number I in the electronic mathematics, we would never have had what we have today. So they had to use a roundabout. So when we ask the person then, what would Jesus do? We're using a roundabout. Based on your own limited perception, you can't figure out a way, but if you were to adopt a different point of view, maybe there would be an answer. And so, and then if you accept reincarnation and many lives, if you've had many lives and you've studied, etc., 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 you would have a lot to draw upon. And giving forth the stuff. So the questions like what you're asking about these entities or whatever, I think is going to be much more interesting and explored in terms of plants, botany, plants. It's because we're starting to reaccept what used to be called psychedelics, now is being called plant teachers. And learning from the different plants what they have to teach us about a whole different way to organize themselves. And how did we learn about the various medicinal qualities of all the plants was because of that communication. So if there are, this is a place where there's a long tradition of you might say spirit, the spirit of this plant and the spirit of that plant and so on, having to do perhaps with a certain kind of perspective on working with the energies. And they don't just apply the plant physically, but they talk into the spirit of the plant to cooperate with the endeavor. And I would just predict that this whole question about are there such a things as spirits, or is it different dimensions and aspects of the one thing, all of those questions, that I bet you'll see more progress in the realm of plant teachers exploring. I had one fellow who was really in that realm share with me. I can't remember the different things that he told me now, but about different pieces of wisdom of mushrooms, about how they work together and so on, that we humans would do well to understand. So,
have you experienced like magic mushrooms or whatever?
I have. I experienced magic mushrooms when I was a graduate student, and I was out in a park. And I had a tremendous lesson. I was looking at a rose, and it was very beautiful, and it smelled really good. And the rose kept telling me the aroma, the wonderful thing that you are enjoying, that is in your capacity. It's not me, the rose. It's you. It's you. It's you. You're capable of experience. That's you. That's you. The aroma is your experience. That's you. And I was trying to take it in. I was creating my experience. Later, I was down on myself, and all of a sudden, I smelled something. It was so sweet, just so sweet. It was sweeter than a baby's bath, and for some reason, I just knew it was Jesus. I don't know why I thought that. I just knew it was Jesus, and he just gave me this big hug. And he showed me up in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, which I've been talking, and I feel like I'm on top of the earth. And then he showed me laying in a gutter, hung over, and people are walking over me on their way to work, and I've experienced that. And he's holding both of these like that in his heart. And he says, they're both the same in love. And he just sort of forgave me and freed me. If I only keep remembering it, to not judge myself. And no matter whatever I've been through, that there's something that's being worked out. There's something that's coming along. And to realize, I'm not alone. There's lots of people. Look at all the people that you're interviewing. And there's more that won't be interviewed, that would be. There's a lot of people that are working and trying to pass along what you said. We're trying to move ourselves along.
I'm trying to think of your other books. Are there points in them that we haven't discussed, like psychic powers, channeling your intuitive heart, that kind of thing?
This one, Dream Medicine. This is all my published writings on dreams. I put it together. It has a lot of my artwork in it, and it has the exercises and everything. Everything I've written about dreams, I put in this, except for, if I have one of those, this, in its latest form, is the workbook that started the dream work revolution.
Move it back.
I did this. This was a book it wasn't in this form. It was a mimeograph form in the 70s that 300 A.R.E. members tried at home to see if they could make progress on their own, solving a problem with their dreams. And this is the manual that was used.
It's called Dream Solutions.
Dream Solutions, Dream Realizations. And that's one that it guides you through a process of you select dreams for a week, and it teaches you to review those dreams and come up with a goal that you'd like to achieve, like getting a better exercise program or finding somebody to date or whatever it is. And it helps you work with that first week of dreams to come up with an idea about how you might start. And then you start on that project, collecting more dreams. The next week, you collect those dreams and interpret them about the next stage in your quest. And over the course of 4 weeks, try to get to your goal. And one of the examples is a Peruvian peasant who found this big cache of ancient artifacts by following his dreams from where he lived out into a different part of Peru. And we're using the same kind of a format for people. And that's used as a textbook at Atlantic University.
What about journals? You mentioned revision, venture inward, and then there's the Intuitive Connections Network. What kind of journals do you recommend to people who are doing this work?
Well, I like National Geographic because it keeps you in touch, with lots of different people. I personally don't subscribe to anything now, just the finances, and there's so much that you can get on the web. The International Association for the Study of Dreams has a journal, Dreaming. It's really for professionals, but then they have a magazine called Dreamtime. Dreamtime we had Dream Network, both. We had Sundance. When Sundance finished, then they started Dream Network Bulletin. That went for many years, recently stopped, and now there's Dreamtime that's been going on for a number of years. I don't know what to recommend in terms of magazines. The Yoga Journal, there's a lot. Going into the New Age store in Virginia Beach, there must be 200 or 300 magazines on the rack, of having to do with consciousness, spirituality, new paradigm, what have you.
What about the Association of Scientific Exploration, Society for Scientific Exploration, their journal and conferences?
Right, and Explore. I'm a big follower of Stephen Schwartz, who not only is a scientist but a journalist in a way, and he writes regularly for the journal Explore. That's devoted to health primarily. The Journal of Parapsychology, they were lamenting, that's like an ESP journal, that their subscriber list is just going down, 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 and the parapsychology, as it used to be known, seems to be somehow falling away into, studies of remote viewing and doing things in your life using remote viewing, things of that sort. I don't really know. Kenosis, I used to get Kenosis magazine. I don't even know if they're still in print. I don't take in, like I say, I don't subscribe to magazines. I review a lot of books coming my way, and looking on the internet.
Okay. What's your next book? Do you have one that you're thinking about?
Well, I turned in a proposal. The agent really thought we had. I've never been able to sell a book proposal. Every book that I've written, except the Dream Medicine I just put together for the rest of stuff, have all been commissioned. And every time that I put in a proposal, nobody takes it. This last one, I was trying to really get cute and everything. I want to really share about, here are these methods to hand to you, and here's the implications of this kind of thing, and stuff is going on today that really makes a difference, So I forget the title of the last one is The Future of Empathy, The Future and Empathy in a World Without Boundaries. Starbuck the Flying Goat, Starbuck the Flying Goat, Gringo Shaman's Gifts to the World, or something like that. Telling my story. The reason it's important is because you've got a person who's in some ways kind of ignorant that have these experiences, following them through, being led to stuff that have these implications and these gifts for other people, basically, is what I've done, is I've just created. I think of myself now more of as an inventor and looking for someone that wants to get these inventions out. like what we're finding now, the dream circle is really powerful. It shouldn't really have to cost any money. But somebody has to mail out the emails, and that's a nuisance. I'll find volunteers to do it. I got 2 or 3 that are recruited. One way it was useful was somebody would like to do dream groups, but don't feel that they have the skill. And then they send out these emails, and they watch the whole thing go, and all the emails are just giving the instructions. They don't have to email it for anything. They don't know nothing. People do it themselves. So there's a group, we're trying to see if we could raise money to create an appliance that could go on the internet. So if a bunch of people wanted to be in a dream circle, they could go to the appliance, plug in everybody's email, and the appliance would take over and mail out the instructions, collect the dreams, mail out the collection of dreams, go to the next thing. And there's a part in the sequence where it goes in 2 directions, where the dreamers are looking at one thing and processing, and the person who's being dreamed for has the dream, and they're doing something else, and then they both shoot their information back for everybody to share. So you've got this email thing going on over a course of 6 days. It seems like it's a long time, whereas if you're together, sure, in 2 hours you can do the whole thing, in the morning. But to get people together is a big deal, a big scheduling deal. So this way, you could be anywhere on the planet, anywhere, as long as at least during a 24-hour period, you can get your homework in for that day. You can be in a circle. So now it's only limited, but we just don't have a way to get that out. So we're going to see, they're doing one of those fund me things, little dream for me, people that might donate to create this thing. We'll see if it happens. In the meantime, I'm just using my Peace Corps volunteer experience and trying to get people to volunteer to do the email so a bunch of people could go experience it. I'm going to different groups, like it was just with the Dowsers, and to see about them maybe having a dream for one of them and maybe having to do with their personal relationship to dowsing,
Sounds
so
good.
There's just so much, and it really brings people together.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think should be mentioned in terms of this new consciousness?
Well, relationships definitely are important. We focus a lot about what goes on between our ears or in our heart, but the reason for doing all of that is for more productive relationship. It's not just to give you a high. So I think that that's important. Now maybe I say that because I've been troublesome. But there's a couple of people who've analyzed, Cayce did, for example, lots of readings on past lives and so on. And when you analyze the stories, who they were in terms of their occupation, king, queen, servant, whatever, is really irrelevant to their lessons. It's their relationships and how they handle the relationships that had to do with their growth or their lack of growth. And then if you take the Native American thing as all my relations, that maybe it's really foolish to think of yourself as somebody. Just think of yourself as in a network of relationships. Mm-hmm. This is my hard lesson because I tried to be all on my own. I think maybe there was so much emotional turmoil in my family. I think I am 2 years old and meet my dad. It turns out when he was a kid, his dad would embarrass him by making him wear a dress. In front of all his men's friends, my granddad's men's friends, embarrassed my dad terribly. So he got this whole thing about effeminate, So he sees me and he's rescuing me from being effeminate. But me, I'm being stolen from my 3 moms. And who is this guy, So that gets me off on a really funny start. If we had a chance to talk about it before he died, but we never really had a chance to review that history.
Have you tried channeling him?
I won't call it that. That seems like too fancy a word for what purpose, but I could be with him. We had a very interesting experience, I'll tell you. That's helpful. And learning how to recognize the stuff that happens to you. He came to visit me once when I lived in Virginia Beach. He was traveling with his wife with a trailer, and he had this beautiful truck. And they weren't going to travel with the trailer anymore. So, Dad, could I have that truck? There's no way he'd give me that truck. 40-some years anyway. Old. No, no, of course you can't have that truck. Okay, years go by. And I buy a big truck. I didn't make the connection. I'm driving along. My wife, who is a medium, I'm hearing my dad, but I just think it's my imagination, okay? My dad's smiling because I'm driving a truck just like his. I hadn't made the connection. And my wife, Janet, she said, Henry's on the phone, he's trying to get in touch with you. I don't know why I'm telling you that. Henry's my dad's name, too. I'm the junior. So she was picking up that he was present talking to me. She sensed that and told me that. And I said, well, my God, here was the fantasy I was just having. That was him? That wasn't just my imagination? And I quit. And then being with a couple of other people who are mediums and so on, one thing led to another. And you can be close to someone who's far away. And it's really no different than that.
Got it. Anything else that we haven't talked about that should be in the chapter?
Well, I want to thank you, first of all. I don't know what made you think of contacting me. But I took the word visionary very seriously because I felt that I am a visionary scientist, but I'm not saying that by way of bragging, but more I want people to see this stuff because they don't realize they're visionaries too. And my work is, I want to call it visionary because I want them to adopt and recognize the visionary aspect of life. Otherwise, I'd say, I'm a humanistic psychologist or a transpersonal something, I don't know. But I use that word myself because, I had visions, and I am sharing that. And people that have written, I have the classic shamanistic life story kind of a deal, having troubles, having a transformation, developing gifts, giving them to others, growing through doing that, and the philosophy coming out, And so you were, in some sense, helping me because you were pointing, hey, I'm talking to visionary scientists. Would you be one of them? Wow, you're recognizing me somehow. I need to stand up to this. It's tough to be. It's hard to come into your own. It's not easy.
Especially for a man in this culture. I think it's harder for men.
Yeah, I don't know. There's certainly more girls in counseling, so they're wiser. I had so few men clients when I was a counselor.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They're not supposed to ask for help. You mentioned a professor at UV who wrote the book about reason and consciousness.
Yes. I can find the book here, maybe quickly.